एवरीवन, वेलकम टू माय यूट्यूब चैनल द सोलफुल डायरी। आज के वीडियो में हम डिस्कस करेंगे नॉवेल के बारे में। इससे पहले की वीडियोस में हम ड्रामा, प्रोज, पोइट्री के बारे में डिस्कस कर चुके हैं, जिसका लिंक डिस्क्रिप्शन में। चलिए आज की वीडियो स्टार्ट करते हैं और नॉवेल्स के बारे में डिस्कस करते हैं। Novel. A novel is a book of long narrative and literary prose. The genre has historical roots both in the fields of the medieval and early modern romance and in tradition of the novella. The latter supplied the present genre term in the late 18th century. Further definition of the genre is historically difficult. The construction of the narrative, the plot, the way reality is created in a work of fiction, the fascination of the character study, and the use of language are usually discussed to show a novel's artistic merits. Most of these requirements were introduced in the 16th and 17th century in order to give fiction a justification outside the field of actual history. The individualism of the presentation makes the personal memoir and the autobiography the two closest relatives among the genres of modern histories. Major forms of novel. The following are the major forms of novel: the prose romances, the travelogues, the gothic novel, the picaresque novel, the epistolary novel, the domestic novel, the historical novel, the regional novel, the prophetic novel, the psychological novel, and the short story. The prose romances. Romances in verse were written much earlier than the romances in prose. Prose romances are the earliest form of the novel. They are simply fantasies in which the authors make the fullest use of their imagination and fancy and create an ideal world which bears little or no resemblance with real life. The earliest of them is the famous Morte d'Arthur, the legend retold by Sir Thomas Malory in prose. This takes us back to the legendary world of knighthood and chivalry. The other 16th century prose romances are Lily Euphis in two parts and Sydney's Arcadia, a pastoral romance conceiving a dreamland or pre-fancy. Lord's Rosalind is a love romance, so is also Robert Greene's Pandosto. Bacon's The New Atlantis is also a prose romance. The travelogues. The novel proper started in a limited sense with travelogues. The travelogues are travel stories relating the adventures of the travelers or voyagers in unknown and uncharted seas, the often land or uninhabited island or some island inhabited by a strange creature. The earliest of them is Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe. Robinson Crusoe land on an uninhabited island and somehow manages to live there for several years and until he is rescued from there by a lucky chance by a passing ship of his own country. Another famous travelogue is Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travel. In this romance, Gulliver lands on several islands inhabited by such strange creatures as the Lilliputians, Houyhnhnms, Brobdingnags, and Yahoos. However, Swift's episodes in these adventures have very pungent satire on contemporary political situations. The Gothic novel, derived from the word Goths, used for a Germanic tribe, the Gothic novel has supernatural elements like ghosts, haunted houses, etc., which induces horror, apprehension, and insecurity. Example: Horace Walpole's Castle of Otranto, a Gothic story, and Radcliffe's The Mysteries of Udolpho, etc. The picaresque novel. The picaresque novel, Spanish picaresca from picaro, for rogue or rascal, is a popular subgenre of prose fiction which is usually satirical and depicts in realistic and often humorous detail the adventures of a roguish hero of a low social class who lives by his wits in a corrupt society. This style of novel originated in 16th century Spain and flourished throughout Europe in the 17th and 18th century. It continues to influence modern literature. The word "picaro" starts to first appear in Spain with the current meaning in 1545. The word "picaro" does not appear in Lazarillo de Tormes, the novella credited uh, with founding the genre. The expression picaresque novel was coined in 1810. The character type of Lazarillo, which determines the story, and the so-called picaresque novel genre has been shaped from characterization elements already present in Roman literature, with Petronius Satiricon. Lazarillo takes some of the traits of the central figure of Encolpius, a former gladiator, but it is unlikely that the author had access to Petronius' work from the comedies of Plautus. It borrows from the figure of Parasite and the supple slave, and other traits are taken from Apuleius the Golden Ass. The Golden Ass and Satyricon were particularly revived and widely read in Renaissance Europe, and are rare surviving examples of a mostly lost genre which was highly popular in the classical world known as Milesian tales. Arabic literature, which was read widely in Spain in the times of Al-Andalus and possessed a literary tradition with similar themes, is another possible formative influence on the Picaresque style. Al-Hamadani uh, of Hamadan, Iran is credited with inventing the literary genre of macumat, in which a wandering vagabond makes his living on the gifts his listeners give him, following his extemporaneous displays of rhetoric, erudition, or verse, often done with a Richter's touch. Ibn al-Astakuvi or al-Astakuni also wrote in the genre Makamat, comparable to later European picaresque novels, while elements of Chaucer and Boccaccio have a picaresque feel and are likely to have contributed to the style. The modern picaresque begins with Lazarillo de Tons, which was published anonymously in Antwerp and Spain in 1554. It is variously considered either the first picaresque novel or at least the antecedent of the genre. The title character Lazarillo is a picaro who must live by his wits and is in, a, in an impoverished country full of hypocrisy. The autobiography of Benevento Cellini, written in Florence beginning in 1558, also has much in common with the picaresque. Another early example is Matthew Aleman's Guzman de Alfrage, characterized by religiosity. Francisco de Quevedo's El Buscon, according to Francisco Rico, the exact date is uncertain, yet it was certainly a very early work, is considered the masterpiece of its genre by A. Parker because of its Baroque style and the study of the delinquent psychology. However, a more recent school of thought led by Francis Rico rejects Parker's view, contending instead that the protagonist Pablos is a highly unrealistic character simply as means of Quovodo to launch classist, racist, and sexist attacks. Moreover, argues Rico, the structure of the novel is radically different from previous works of the picaresque genre. Quovodo uses the convention of a picaresque as a mere vehicle to show off his abilities with conceit and rhetoric, rather than to construct a satirical critique of Spanish Golden Age society. Indeed, in order to understand the historical context that led to the development of these paradigmatic picaresque novels in Spain during the 16th and 17th century, it is essential to take into consideration the circumstances surrounding the lives of conversos, which ancestors have been Jewish and whose new Christian faith European countries. These Spanish novels were read and imitated. In Germany, Grimmel Schossen wrote Simplicius Simplicissimus, the most important of non-Spanish picaresque novel. It describes the devastation caused by the Thirty Years' War, and Lycidas Gil Blas is a classical example of the genre, which in France has declined into an aristocratic adventure in Britain. The body of Tobias Smollett's work and Daniel Toffe's Moll Flounder are considered picaresque, but they lack the sense of religious redemption of delinquency that was very important in Spanish and German novels. The triumph of Moll Flanders is more economic than moral. The classic Chinese novel Journey to the West is considered to have considerable picaresque elements. Having been written in 1590, it is contemporary with much of the above, but is unlikely to have been directly influenced by the European genre. The epistolary novel. An epistolary novel is a novel written as a series of documents. The usual form is letters, although diary entries, newspapers, clippings, and other documents are sometimes used. Recently, electronic documents such as recordings and radio blogs and emails have also come into use. The word epistolary is derived through Latin from the Greek word epistle, meaning a letter. The epistolary form can add a greater realism to a story because it mimics the workings of real life. It is thus able to demonstrate differing points of view without recourse to the device of an omniscient narrator. There are two theories on the genesis of the epistolary novel. The first claims that the genre originated from novels with inserted letters, in which the portion containing the third person narrative in between the letters was gradually reduced. The other theory claims that epistolary novel arose from miscellanies of letters and poetry. Some of the letters were tied together into a mostly amorous plot. Both claims have some validity. The first truly epistolary novel, The Spanish Prison of Love, Cárcel de Amor, 1485 by Diogo de San Pedro, belongs to a tradition of novels in which a large number of inserted letters already dominated the narrative. Other well-known examples of early epistolary novels are closely related to the tradition of letter books and miscellanies of letters within the successful editions of Edme Borsol's Letter of Respect, Gratitude and Love, 1669. A group of letters written to a girl named Babette was expanded and became more and more distinct from the other letters until it formed a small epistolary novel entitled Letters to Babette. The immensely famous letters of a Portuguese nurse, generally attributed to Gabriel Joseph de la Vergne, Comte de Guilbergs, though a small minority still regard Mariana Alcoforado as the author, is claimed to be intended to be part of a miscellany of Guilberg's prose and poetry. The founder of the epistolary novel in English is said by many to be James Howell, with familiar letters, who writes of prison, foreign adventure, and the love of women. The first novel to expose the complex play that the genre allows was After Bain's Love Letters Between a Nobleman and a Sister, 1684, which appeared in three successful volumes in 1684, 85, and 87. The novel shows the genre's results of changing perspectives. Individual points were presented by an individual characters, and the central voice of the author and moral evaluation disappeared, at least in the first volume. Her further volumes introduced the narrator. Bain furthermore explored a realm of intrigue with letters that fall into the wrong hands, with letters withheld by protagonists, and even more complex interactions. The epistolary novel as a genre became popular in the 18th century in the works of such authors as Samuel Richardson, with his immensely successful novels Pamela 1740 and Clarissa 1749, and France. There was Letters Personae by Montesquieu, followed by Julie La novel Heloise by Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Laclos Les Dangereuses, which used the epistolary form to great dramatic effect because the sequence of events was not always related directly or explicitly. In Germany, there was John Wolfgang von Goethe's Die Leiden des Jungen Werthers and Frederick Holderlin's Hyperion. The first North American novel, The History of Emily Montague by Franz Brooke, was written in epistolary form. Starting in the 18th century, the epistolary form was subject to much ridicule, resulting in a number of savage burlesques. The most notable examples of these was Henry Fielding's Shamala, written as a parody of Pamela, and then the female narrator can be found wielding a pen and scribbling her diary entries under the most dramatic and unlikely of circumstances. The epistolary novel slowly fell out of use in the late 18th century. Although Jane Austen tried her hand at the epistolary in juvenile writings and her novella Lady Susan, she abandoned the structure for her later works. It is thought that her lust novel First Impressions, which was redrafted to become Pride and Prejudice, may have been epistolary. Pride and Prejudice contains an unusual number of letters quoted in full, and some play a critical role in the plot. The epistolary form nonetheless saw continued use, surviving in exceptions or in fragments in 19th century novels. In honor of de Balzac's novel Letter of Two Brides, two women who became friends during their education at a convent correspond over a 17-year period, exchanging letters describing their lives. Mary Shelley employs the epistolary form in her novel Frankenstein. Shelley uses the letters as one of a variety of framing devices as the story is presented through the letters of a sea captain and scientific explorer attempting to reach the North Pole who encounters Victor Frankenstein and records the dying man's narrative and confessions. The late 19th century Bram Stoker released one of the most widely recognized and successful novels in the epistolary form to date, Dracula, printed in 1897. The novel is compiled entirely of letters, diary entries, newspaper clippings, telegrams, doctor's notes, ship logs, and the like, which Stoker adroitly employs to balance believability and dramatic tension. There are three types of epistolary novel: monologic, giving the letters of only one character, like letters of a Portuguese nun; dialogic, giving the letters of two characters, like Mary Jane; Riccoboni's letters of Fanny Butler; and polylogic, with three or more letters writing characters. In addition, a crucial element in polylogic epistolary novels like Clarissa and Dangerous Liaisons is a dramatic device of discrepant awareness, the simultaneous but separate correspondences of the heroines and the villains, creating dramatic tension. The domestic novel. The domestic novels, as their title suggests, presents the day-to-day life of an average of middle-class families. The life patterns of the members of a family and their relations with their friends and neighbors are artistically presented in these novels. The festivals and festivities, functions and celebrations, birthdays and nuptials and marriages are graphically described in these novels. Jane Austen is the most important writer of the domestic novels. Her Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, and Emma are the best examples of domestic novel. The historical novel, a novel that has its settings a usually significant period of history and that attempts to convey the spirit, manners, and social conditions of a past age with realistic detail and fidelity, which is in some cases only apparent fidelity to historical fact. The work may deal with actual historical personages or it may contain a mixture of fictional and historical characters. An early example of historical prose fiction is Lu Guizhan-Hong's 14th century romance of the Three Kingdoms, which covers one of the most important periods of Chinese history and left a lasting impact on Chinese culture. The historical novel was further popularized in the 19th century by writers classified as romantics. Many regard Sir Walter Scott as the first to write historical novels. Gregory Lucas, in his historical novel, argues that Scott is the first fictional writer who saw history not just as a convenient frame in which to stage a contemporary narrative, but rather as a distinct social and cultural setting. His novels of Scottish history, such as Waverley and Rob Roy, focus upon a middling character who sits at the intersection of various social groups in order to explore the development of society through conflict. His Ivanhoe gains credit for renewing interest in the Middle Ages. Victor Hugo's The Hunchback of Notre Dame furnishes another 19th century example of the romantic historical novel, as does Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace. In the United States, James Fenimore Cooper was a prominent author of historical novels. In French literature, the most prominent inheritor of Scott's style of the historical novel was Balzac. Though the genre has evolved since its inception, the historical novel remains popular with authors readers to this day. Bestsellers include Patrick O'Brien's Aubrey Maturin series, Ken Follett's Pillars of the Earth, and Neil Stephenson's Baroque cycle. striking development in British Irish writing in the past 25 years has been renewed interest in the First World War. Works include William Boyd's An Ice Cream War, Sebastian Falk's Bird Song, and The Girl at the Lion or concerned with the war's consequences. Pat Barker's Regeneration trilogy and Sebastian Barry's A Long, Long Way. Many early historical novels played an important role in the rise of the European popular interest in history of the Middle Ages. Hugo's Hunchback often receives credit for fueling the movement to preserve the Gothic architecture of France, leading to the establishment of monuments. Accused the French governmental authority for historic preservation. The genre of the historical novel has also permitted some authors, such as the Polish novelist Bolesław Prus in his sole historical novel Paroha, to distance themselves from their own time and place to gain perspective on society and on human conditions, or to escape the depredations of the censor. In some historical novels, major historical events take place mostly offstage, while the fictional characters inhabit the world where those events occur. Robert Louis Stevenson's Kidnapped recounts mostly private adventures set against the backdrop of the Jacobite troubles in Scotland. Charles Dickens' Barnaby Rudge is set amid the Gordon riots and a tale of two cities in the French Revolution. In some works, the accuracy of the historical elements has been questioned, as in Alexander Dumas' Queen Margaret. Postmodern novelists such as John Barth and Thomas Pynchon operate with even more freedom, mixing historical characters and settings with invented history and fantasy, as in the novels The Short Reed, Factors, and Mason and Dixon, respectively. A few writers create historical fiction without fictional characters. One example is Claudius by 20th century writer Robert Graves. Another is the Masters of Rome series by Colin McCullough. The regional novel. This type of novel is set in a particular geographic section and deals with the living and culture of that area. Examples are Thomas Hardy's Wessex and Arkin Aryan's Malgory, etc. They are common types of novel. Apart from these, there are many more varieties that excel in creating the literature of the time and making the essence of novel more dedicated and authentic in the present scenario. The prophetic novel. The prophetic novel tries to forecast what the future would be like. These novels do not claim to be absolutely correct or authentic. They only give us a tentative picture of the future or the basis of the tendencies prevailing in the present. Aldous Huxley, in The Brave New World, envisaged in 1932 a future in which the entire populace would be mentally conditioned by the totalitarian despots. The psychological novel. A psychological fiction is a specific subgenre of the wide-ranging thriller genre. This genre often incorporates elements from the mystery genre in addition to the typical traits of the thriller genre. Usually, thrillers focus on plot over fictional characters, emphasizing on intense physical action or the character's psyche. Psychological thrillers tend to reverse this formula to a certain degree, emphasizing the characters just as much if not more than the plot. Psychological novel, also called psychological realism, is a work of prose fiction which places more than the usual amount of emphasis on interior characterization, on the motives, circumstances, and internal action which springs from and develops external action. The psychological novel is not content to state what happens but goes on to explain the motivation of this action. This type of writing, character and characterization are more than usually important, and they often delve deeper into the mind of a character than novels of other genres. The psychological novel can be called the novel of the inner man, so to say. In some cases, the stream of consciousness technique as well as interior monologues may be employed to better illustrate the inner workings of the human mind at work. Flashbacks may also be featured. While these three textual techniques are also prevalent in modernism, there is no deliberate effort to fragment the prose or compel the reader to interpret the text. The tale of Genji, written in 11th century Japan, has often been considered the first psychological novel. In the West, the origins of the psychological novel can be traced as far as Giovanni Boccaccios 1344 Elegia di Madonna Fiammetta, that is before the term psychology was coined. The short story. A short story is a work of fiction that is usually written in prose, often in narrative format. A short story usually deals with a few characters and often concentrates on the creation of a mood rather than the plot. The short story format tends to be more pointed than longer works of fiction such as novellas. In the 20th and 21st century, sense and novels, short story definition based on length differ somewhat even among professional writers, in part because of the fragmentation of the medium into genres. Since the short story format includes a wide range of genres and style, the actual length is determined by the individual author's preference or the story's actual needs in terms of creative trajectory or story arc, and the submission guidelines relevant to the story's actual market. Guidelines vary greatly among publishers. Many short story writers define their work through a combination of creative personal expression and artistic integrity. They attempt to resist categorization by genre as well as definition by numbers, finding such approaches limiting and counterintuitive to artistic form and reasoning. As a result, definitions of the short story based on length splinter even more when the writing process is taken into consideration. A short story is often judged by its ability to provide a complete or satisfying treatment of its characters and subjects. Fiction, such as novellas in the 20th and 21st century sense and novels, short story definitions based on length differ somewhat even among professional writers, in part because of the fragmentation of the medium into genres. Since the short story format includes a wide range of genres and styles, the actual length is determined by the individual author's preference or the story's actual needs in terms of creativity, trajectory, or story arc, and the submission guidelines relevant to the story's actual market. Guidelines vary greatly among publishers. Many short story writers define their work through a combination of creative personal expression and artistic integrity. They attempt to resist categorization by genre as well as definition by numbers, finding such approaches limiting and counterintuitive to artistic form and reasoning. As a result, definitions of the short story based on length splinter even more when the writing process is taken into consideration. थैंक यू। आई होप आज की वीडियो आपको पसंद है। कैसी लगी हमें कमेंट करके बताएं और हमें ये भी कमेंट करके बताएं कि आप आने वाली वीडियोस किस टॉपिक पर देखना चाहते हैं। अगर वीडियो अच्छी लगी तो लाइक शेयर एंड सब्सक्राइब टू माय चैनल। मिलते हैं कल एक और इन्फॉर्मेटिव वीडियो के साथ शाम 4 बजे। टिल देन कीप वॉचिंग एंड कीप सपोर्टिंग द सोलफुल डायरी। थैंक यू।